Okay, and
See if it comes.
going to look at an extension of SQL injection. Is everybody okay as far as being able to intercept the requests with Burp Suite, assuming that the web server is working? I know a couple people are having trouble with the web server itself. If there's any Windows 7 64-bit experts that have this working on Windows 7 64-bit, might see if you can give a couple people a hand that are having trouble with that exact operating system, trying to run it on the host. So that one seems to be tricky. So, so on SQL injection, one of the more practical attacks, if you can pull it off, is to go ahead and put a web shell onto the web server. So in other words, you're actually adding a new web page that doesn't exist, and you're doing it through the database. It takes a lot of stars to line up to get this to work. You have to be able to insert a pretty fair amount of text, and also you need the database to have rights to write a file out onto the web server. It typically requires the database and the web server to be co-located on the same host. But that's not as uncommon as it may sound. Most enterprise applications are not going to be set up that way. They're going to be multi-tiered with the web server and a DMZ and the database on an intranet. However, a lot of companies are buying more software instead of building it themselves, and when you buy a package, a lot of times the database and the web application will be co-located. So I don't have any statistics to back it up, but it just seemed anecdotally like for a couple of years it was less common for them to be co-located, and then recently it seems like there's an uptick again as people buy products instead of building them in-house. All right, so we'll go ahead and take a look at we'll stick with the user info page because I think we've been using that in the demos all along. But these other pages that are listed in the menu would work as well. So we're going to go ahead and toggle hints one time, or you can toggle it twice. If you toggle it once, it's going to enable the level 1 hints inside of Matilda. My machine's just being a little slow, so hopefully yours is a little quicker. And that enables this hints bar, and you can open the bar, and it'll have help for different types of vulnerabilities. The hints bar is the same, but what you see listed under it is going to be different on each page. This is the new hint system introduced in 2.5. The way it works is it looks at the page and figures out what the vulnerabilities are on that page, at least the ones that I know about, and it dynamically grabs the help files and loads them at runtime. If you enable hints level 2, it's going to keep the hints up here at the top, and it will also enable the tutorials, which appear at the bottom of the pages. So for example, this particular page happens to have the SQL injection tutorial on it, and that's going to be a little bit more of a walkthrough rather than like a hint. There's going to be a lot more information. And there's the cross-site scripting tutorial. So let's see if I can get us back to hints level 1, because it's kind of annoying to have all that extra text at the bottom if you don't need it.
We have security level at 0, 1.
Security level? Yeah, security level will change the actual PHP code that runs. So in security level 5, it's literally pretty much a different website. and it'll be harder to break into.
Can you break into level 5?
What are you gonna bring in?
Well, in theory, you can break into anything, so certainly not going to say
Can
there's
Jeremy break in level 5?
no. Every time that someone shows me a way to get into level 5, I patch it. So I don't know of any ways, because if I did, I would patch it. It has been broken into several times, and generally people will email me and say, "This is how I got in. Appreciate that." If anybody in here has done that, and then I'll go in and patch the system. So if you cause a problem in level 5, it's a bug. It's not a feature. How rare is it to hear a developer say that? All right, so one of the things I wanted to show you all was the web shells, but it's a little complicated and it's going to be virtually impossible to copy. So what I did is I embedded it into the hint for you if you want to follow along. And it's down here at the bottom under writing files to the operating system. And I'm going to copy it myself because there's no way I'm typing that. So, all right, so we're going to need to put it all together here. So we're going to take what we talked about earlier this morning with the encoding, and we're going to couple that with what Conrad talked about and put it all together into a practical attack. Of course, I think everybody would agree that SQL map is very practical. This is more like a practical hand-built attack, I guess you would say. SQL map can automatically do what we're about to do, by the way, so. Okay, so let's break down what our injection looks like, and be warned, I don't think it's going to work right out of the gate. I believe we have to make some modifications to get it to work, because I think the table's changed, so I'll go ahead and be ready to make some changes. So we're going to do a union attack. And it's going to be on that username field. And what we're going to do is we're going to select 4 columns out of the database. One of the columns is weird. It's kind of like saying select 1. You're not even selecting from anything. You're just saying select 1. The database will simply parrot back what you said to select. It's like echo. So we're going to echo back this HTML here. Excuse me, this PHP. So there's this PHP code that we're saying, hey SQL server, I'm going to say something to you, just say it back, and it'll do that. And in fact, you can even try like select 1, 2, 3 with one of your unions, and you'll see that it'll just say like 1, 2, 3 in the username field. But we're gonna output this into a file using the into dump file command. And we're going to send it to this file here, which is htdocs, Matilda, and backdoor.php. And then we have the comment symbol on the end to comment out that and the password part. So we're putting a lot of things together here in this attack. How do we know that that's the right path to dump the file into? How do we know that's the web root? We talked about it earlier. There was a vulnerability that told us this.
Disclosure vulnerability.
There was a path disclosure vulnerability earlier. We made a note of that information. That gave away where the web root is because it told us where the web pages were being served from, right? So we've got this information. It's definitely not magical. So we can do this. Now the question is and for you as well, is does your MySQL server have rights to write this file out to the root or not? It shouldn't, but you'd be surprised how many times it does. A lot of times when you buy a shrink wrap product, it's going to be running at a very high privilege level because that reduces tech support issues. The systems will work a lot better if they're running with high privileges, since they can do anything they want. And even if a mistake was made to where the developer didn't intend, say, for a file to be written out to certain directory, it'll work anyway because it's running as root or some other high privilege. Okay, so we're going to just put a, I'm going to hide the pop-up hints for display purposes. And we're going to put just any injection at all in here. It doesn't matter. Let's turn the intercept on as well. Okay, so I'm just going to put some text in there. Well, I guess to stay on track, I'm going to put canary in there. Okay, I can't replace canary with this injection. It's loaded with all kinds of special characters that the Apache server would try to parse as part of the request, and it's not going to work. So we'll take that out and go over to the decoder, and we'll paste it in here. We already have it set up to encode as URLs, so we'll just copy this here below. But I am going to be careful to add a space onto the end because it's my SQL database and it requires a space after the comment. And then we're going to try this, and I don't believe this is going to work. I think we're going to have to do one more thing. But let's go ahead and try it. It kind of depends on which version I've got loaded. Okay, so we're going to forward that onto the web server. The web server is going to pass this to the database. It's talked about in the last module. All right, and we get an error. But the error is not a syntax error, and that's really important to note. So the error is the used select statements have a different number of columns. So we can fix that. Whenever you're doing a union query, the number of columns being selected by the table that the application is going to select from naturally by just using the page correctly, and the number of columns that your union query that you're adding in, they have to match. So if the first one is selecting 4, you've got to select 4. There's another problem too. You have to select the same data type for each column. So if the application is selecting username and username is a string, then you need to have your first column select something that is a string, or at least something that can be cast to a string, like an integer, which can be represented as a string. So one of the tricks we'll use is, if we go back to Notepad, is we're selecting nulls as filler to fill in those columns that are being selected by the application. So we don't really know exactly what the application is selecting, because even in the error message, remember it said select star. It didn't actually tell us the columns it was selecting. We don't know how many columns are being selected, right? If you remember, the error message was like select star from accounts where username equals, and then it was the single tick is where we're getting injected in, right? So if we couple that with our query, union, select, we're not really sure how many columns to put here. That's easy to figure out. Before you actually try to do the injection, just start trying to select null columns. Select 1 null, 2 nulls, 3 nulls, 4 nulls, 5 nulls until this error message here goes away. Maybe you'll get some other error message, or maybe you'll get a response back from the server, but either way, now you know you've got the right number of columns. So you can figure it out. So we'll just try to add another one. Oops. And see if that helps. Okay, this part's going to be supplied by the application, so we don't need to include that, and then we'll include the rest here. So we'll go back over to Burp Suite, go to the decoder tab, and I'm just going to go ahead and add in that null. Now notice as I type, Burp Suite will go ahead and keep the encoding going at the bottom. Okay, we'll forward this version with the extra null in there to see if we're going to pad out to the right number of columns. While we're waiting, since this is going a little slow, why would I use a null? Like, why not use, say, the number 1 or a decimal or the letter A or just whatever? Like, why? What's so special about nulls? Remember the 2 rules about unions. One is the number of columns have to match. It's the data type. Null casts to everything, pretty much. I think the only thing it won't cast to is maybe itself, perhaps. But otherwise, it's pretty happy.
So
Okay.
the reason why nulls work is because they doesn't matter what data type.
Doesn't matter what data type. So we have an error message here from the system, but it's not really a real bad error message, and it's different than what we had before. So let's just see what happened. Just because we have an error message doesn't mean that the attack didn't work. So we just have to try it out. We got to figure out if we got that file written to the web root directory. So for the page, I'm just going to type in page equals backdoor.php because that was the name of the file that we gave. And then we're going to have to try to request that and see if it comes back from the server. And there it is. That's fun. So we've added a new page to the server. Now as far as the web shells, I wrote this one, and I guess that's obvious because there's an error in the shell itself right down here. But some good shells you can get are from Laudanum, which is published by Secure Ideas, and it's Kevin Johnson's company. And they put out shells in PHP and I think C# maybe, and a couple of other different languages, and they've already got them prepackaged and ready to go. You just have to inject them. All right, so now we have
shells on Matillion.
what was that?
You said they're prepackaged, ready to go.
In Laudanum, the Laudanum project.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you Google the Laudanum project, they've already got those shells prepackaged in a variety of languages, and their shells have some intelligence built in. For example, you can put what your IP address is going to be in the shell, and it'll only respond to you, so that when you poison the machine, that you're the only one that can get to the shell. And if you're doing pen testing, obviously that's going to be really important that you don't let anybody else in. So this shell that I'm using here, in addition to being buggy, is certainly not professional grade. It's just something I got working. So now that we have a command line, we can start to try some commands to figure out what operating system we're running on. So ls didn't work. Let's try dir. Okay, that works. So what kind of system is this? Windows. And here's kind of a giveaway right there. I mean, other than the fact that the dir command worked. All right, and then so now we can do just pretty much whatever. So we can even start to, we can do execute commands, or you know, we have shells. So now you can go ahead and open up Telnet, open up the firewall, enable remote desktop protocol, open up port 3389. You know, you get the idea. So what user are we running as when we upload this shell? What privileges do we have? It's not necessarily system.
Whoever it's running as.
Yeah, it's running as the web server. So its results may vary, right? Depends on what rights you have as to what you can do. But if you can get a shell at all, you can do some damage. And certainly it's a finding that would be good in your report. Okay, so maybe like just as an example, you could try to run this command. And we can start to type the source code of the application itself, get the source code so we can read it. That'll definitely help for further pivoting into the system. All right, so that is injecting web shells. And while I'm in here, I think we said that there was 2 problems with that demo. It was we don't have a space on the end, right? And we don't have a null. There was a null missing. And that was in the SQL injection hints. So I'll try to fix this so I don't forget. And in the hint, there's a little reminder to try the laudanum project. Okay, so we had to add a null, and we needed a space on the end. Okay, hopefully that's fixed. I'll get this code released tonight. All right, is there any questions on any SQL injection in general that Conrad or myself can answer, or anything about injecting some web shells? So if you like web shells, Adrian's going to do a demo for us later on using a completely different method, but he's going to inject a web shell using another methodology. And I think I've injected web shells like 100 times or something like that, and it's still just awesome every time. It's so much fun. So if I'm at work and you hear me start giggling over the cube, shell. So. All right. Carla's lunch at 11:30?
Probably about 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and try to at least start the next module. But first, let's take 5 minutes. I've got 11:18 on the clock that matters, so we'll start at 11:24.